Many companies have had to manage almost entirely remote workforces since March, and with an entirely remote workforce comes an even heavier reliance on cloud-based collaboration tools. We're going to be going over what some of those challenges are associated with cloud-based collaboration tools and how to better manage them. I'm Juliette Beauchamp, and I'm here with Computer World Executive Editor Ken Mingus, Computer World Managing Editor Val Potter, as well as Computer World Senior Writer Matthew Finnegan. Matthew, I'm going to go to you first. Can you outline what some of these cloud-based collaboration tools are?
Yeah, so there's a wide variety of applications, SaaS applications that are available and widely used now to connect employees, particularly when working from home. But in recent years, we've seen a real widening in the market of different types of solutions. And this can really vary from what a lot of people will often think about in terms of team collaboration, which will be like Slack and like Microsoft Teams in terms of team chat, team messaging. But there's also applications like Zoom, various unified communications vendors, applications which help track and manage teamwork like Asana and Trello, down to enterprise social networks, which have been around for a while, and Facebook Workplace is one of the new vendors here, as well as applications that support creativity, like whiteboarding apps. So there's a huge range of applications being put to use for various functions in order to help people collaborate.
Yeah, it's interesting, Matthew, just to sort of set the scene here, with that background, with that number of apps and ways for employees to stay in touch, once we had the pandemic hit this year and there was such a major shift all at once to, for remote workers to stay in touch, using all of these tools, many of them, if they'd been in the office, they might not have had to rely on Slack or Team Chat because they could just walk down the hall and chat with coworkers. And so you had all of these, so many companies trying to figure out how to juggle all of these, these various applications. And, now the issue is, okay, we've come through the immediacy of getting everybody at home and at least up and running on something. But now what companies have to figure out is what makes sense for them going forward. Do they stick with the sort of the buffet style of everybody kind of uses the app that works best for them, or different teams use different versions of different apps? Or do they try to, settle onto a single, stack like Microsoft Teams that sort of tries to do it all? And I think that's the question that we're looking at now as we get close to 21. Companies have to figure this out. We've gone from the sprint to the marathon now, and I just sort of wanted to throw that out there as kind of where we are now, given all the, the tools that Matthew outlined.
Sure, it really seems like, especially now, there isn't as much of an attitude of, we're just going to make these collaboration tools work right now. Now it seems like this remote work, even after the pandemic ends and it's safe to return to offices, a lot of offices and a lot of companies are saying you can work from home as long as you want. So I imagine that a lot of IT teams have now begun to even think further ahead and how do we continue to support our remote workforce?
Yeah, I would agree. I think initially for a lot of companies, this meant deploying Zoom in particular, or other Google Meet and other video applications to enable meetings to happen quickly. And that was kind of the initial response. But we're seeing that a lot of companies which hadn't done it already are starting to think a bit more long term, a bit more strategically around what applications are really going to help them as they perhaps continue to have some employees working from home, working remotely, and starting to look at how they can support some of the other workflow processes and so forth, which can be enabled by some of these cloud collaboration tools. So yeah, so that might mean that business starts to look at maybe adopting Slack, for example, which is maybe a bit of a more in-depth process than setting up a video call. But we're starting to see the businesses and CIOs are really looking for that longer view at the moment.
One of the issues related to that is costs associated with licensing and hosting and storage of data and all those sorts of things, because with every department is using their own solution, you're not getting any of the volume discounts that you can get if everybody's on the same platform, if your whole organization is using the same thing. There's also a lot of duplication of capabilities that these tools provide. So, you might be paying for the same thing twice or 3 times or 4 times, whereas if everybody was on the same platform, you'd only have to pay for it once at a more discounted rate. And another big concern is if everybody's siloed with their own different application, which is easy to do. I mean, these are SaaS-based. Any business line of business leader can just kind of go out and get it, not maybe without ITs even knowing about it. Is that you lose a lot of the benefits of collaboration if you're only collaborating within your own team, and you're losing those opportunities to collaborate and get insights across the various departments or teams.
Yeah, it's in. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm wondering if we could dive a little bit more into what some of those challenges are associated with, I guess, this sort of patchwork approach where, you have one business group is using Slack and Zoom, and your other business group is using Microsoft Teams. And I can imagine that can be, first of all, like you mentioned, Val, quite costly, but also from an IT team perspective, quite difficult to manage. And I would have to imagine that there's going to be also, because it's quite difficult to manage, I'm wondering if there are any sort of security concerns there, because you may not always know which employees are using what programs and which tools.
Yeah, absolutely. The security and privacy, compliance, those are all huge issues. And, maybe not so much with some of the bigger vendors. On the plus side, a lot of these services, SaaS-based services, are built on, the big cloud providers. So Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud. So there's inherent security built into that. However, you really do need to understand how they're managing, user access and to the data, and all sorts of just smaller. You really have to know the bigger picture in terms of security, but also how each individual vendor that you're using approaches it. And again, if IT doesn't even know all the tools that are being used, how could they possibly understand the security and compliance ramifications associated with them?
It's just that I was going to pick up on that. That was what I was going to. One of the points I wanted to make is that before you can even get your hands around dealing with all of these things, IT almost has to do a survey to figure out what is everybody using, and it goes back to the point you made, Val, about, a lot of these tools overlap. So you may have 2 or 3 tools that do mostly the same thing, and you're not getting the advantages, the cost advantages of, licensing, that if you've got, 1,000-person workforce versus 50 people on a tool, you can save money sometimes with the volume there. And so surveying, your company, figuring out what your employees are doing and what they're using is basically step one. Ideally you'd have some idea of that to begin with, but you really kind of have to nail that down before you can move forward.
Yeah, and I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, guys. Go ahead, Van.
I was just going to say, I think, and that's particularly an issue now, given the pandemic and the fact that everybody did sort of just run out and get something just in order to get up and running, to get everybody communicating from home. So I think more than ever, the possibility of these sort of shadow IT, rogue IT programs being put into use is particularly relevant now.
Yeah, and as well as some of the security and data protection ramifications of having multiple collaboration tools, as Val, you mentioned, in order to get the best out of a lot of collaboration tools, you kind of need that network effect of lots of people using them. With with Microsoft Teams, with Slack. Slack's an acronym for searchable log of all communication and knowledge. And one of the benefits of it is to be able to actually search through and find a conversation which happened maybe before you even joined the company, to understand what's going on in a specific department, to be able to find the right documents and find the right people. If conversations are being held in multiple different places, then it's hard to really get some of the key benefits of particularly these team messaging applications.
I'm wondering too, what sort of challenges arise as IT teams are trying to deploy these cloud collaboration solutions and tools while everyone's remote. Do you all have any insight as to whether that's been a particular challenge or if it's been, I don't know, all super easy?
I don't think it's been super easy, for sure. As Matthew was talking, one of the things that occurred to me is that, for IT, again, it's a moving target, because a lot of the apps that are, let's think about where Slack was, a year ago, or where Zoom was 6 months ago. The companies are rushing to sort of build out these tools to go beyond what they initially did. So Zoom, which everybody thinks of as video, has been, and Matthew, you can talk to this because you've written about it some, has been rushing to sort of bolt on pieces so that it can be more of a productivity tool that goes beyond just video. So as companies are, and of course Microsoft Teams has been adding features over the summer, especially around video. So as IT is trying to suss out what tool's the best tool, they have to remember, it's a moving target. These things are evolving in real time. And so what might work for you now might be different in 6 months, and what might not work for you now might be the perfect solution. You're seeing that, Matthew, in terms of the evolution of these tools?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's obviously been a rapid increase in demand for particularly video services in the initial months, as people started to work from home, and the video software vendors have had to move quickly to, as you said, with Zoom has had its own challenges, but a lot of vendors, just in terms of building out the functionality and being able to support video meetings at scale, there's been a rush to do that. Microsoft has been able to add features very quickly and start to address some of the challenges around replicating maybe some of the more casual conversations that people would have in the office. So I think that there's been a lot of work, and it's been an interesting area to write about, because there's been a lot of action in the industry in that sense. But it's still, I think vendors are still trying to figure out some parts of it, but it's also the same for customers as well. What we're seeing over the past few months is that for other than the early adopters of collaboration tools, we're seeing a lot of organizations really moving forward what they might have planned over the next year or two, or multiple years into a few months. So there's been a bit of a scramble in some cases to find the tools that work, maybe in the shorter term, but yeah. Also, a lot of companies are trying to figure out what the best steps are going forward and which tools are best as well.
I'm wondering too, and Val, I'd love if you can provide us with some insight on this. Like you mentioned, Matthew, there was perhaps at first a bit of a scramble to just use whatever collaboration tools were available or whatever seemed easiest or most intuitive, but I'm wondering now, as you also mentioned, as companies are starting to think about what their longer term plans and longer term goals are going to be around cloud collaboration tools, how can companies make sure that they are getting the most and maximizing the use out of each tool? Like you said, Ken, Zoom is adding new features, and Microsoft Teams is sort of really an all-in-one sort of thing, along with access to the entire Office suite. So Val, how would you advise IT teams, or what sort of practice have you seen that have been helpful in making sure that IT teams are maximizing the benefits of collaboration tools, and therefore also preventing, having 20 different licenses to 20 different collaboration tools?
Exactly. So Well, there needs to be a process of discovery. So first of all, as Ken said, just find out what tools are being used by every single department, and how they're being used. Find out what it is that the business leader or the users, what it is that they like about the tool they choose. Why did they choose that tool? How did they use it? What features do they depend on? And also some experts recommend talking to the product champions, who are the people who probably recommended it to their business leader. Maybe they used it at another company. So just to understand what it is that's important to users, what they need, and across the company, and then delve into the tools themselves. It's just going to be a lot of research. What can each one of these tools and platforms do? Does one tool that one team is using, does that meet the needs of another team, even if they're not using that tool? Can they, are there volume discounts available? Can it be scaled up appropriately across the company? And also work with the vendors to find out what their product roadmaps are, because as we said, this is just moving. It's fast moving, and if you know that, well, there is this one feature that this particular team depends on now, and it's not in this larger product that works for everybody else. Maybe they're working on it and that's going to be there in 6 months. So perhaps you could keep that one team on the other tool for the short term, because they need that particular feature. And then eventually when that feature comes to the other product, you could transition them over at that point. So it's a lot of due diligence, really. Just find out what these tools can do, and what they're going to be able to do, and when.
That it's interesting. That sort of goes to the traditional push-pull between users and IT. And given the fact that tools like, I think, Slack and Zoom sort of bubbled up from the users rather than top down from IT a lot of times, one of the things that seems clear is that companies, and this goes to the point you were just making, Val, is that companies have to remain flexible, because there may be some tools that really do work well or are perfect for whatever team is using them. And you don't want to just wipe out that tool because it doesn't meet some hierarchy of corporate needs. If it's really doing the job, then you need to think about, okay, maybe we do have Zoom for this group, and maybe we do use Teams, somewhere else in the company. But it's a sort of thing where if IT admins and the decision makers at the top are flexible enough to say, okay, you're using this, why are you using it? What are you getting out of it? And can we duplicate that at elsewhere? I think that's going to help companies remain agile. And that's the important thing. You've got to be able to, as we've all seen this year, you have to be able to sort of roll with things. And I think, a top down, one team for one tool for everybody kind of tactic is not necessarily the best one for a lot of companies. Maybe that's just obvious, but I wanted to make that observation.
My one caveat with that would be that any tool that is allowed to be used, I absolutely agree with that, but that any tool does meet the minimum security requirements. You basically need to outlay, these are the security needs, compliance needs, privacy needs that we need to meet. And that includes things like, California's consumer protection law and the GDPR. We have to meet all those just as a baseline. And yes, then if we can support 2, 3, maybe even 4 different tools, as long as they all meet those basic minimum requirements.
Fantastic. Well, before we wrap up here, do any of you have any other sort of key takeaways about managing multiple cloud collaboration tools?
I've got one thing I just want to throw out there real quick, and it's not specific to managing the cloud part of it, but it's important, and that's educating users, making sure that your users are trained. So once you've identified the tools, once you've decided what tools they can and should be using, the ones that are the most secure and do what you need, then you've got to educate people. And that too is difficult when everybody's distributed. You have to make sure that you've got some way of bringing people up to speed. Maybe there are a lot of people who are now working from home who never had to use Zoom or Slack or any other chat app, and now they have to. Now it's critical. So I would just say keep in mind, education is something that often falls off the table here.
Yeah, and I'd add that while there are various challenges in terms of managing multiple collaboration tools, I think it is worthwhile to be able to tap into the innovation of different vendors, to be able to provide employees with the ease of use of applications that they seek, and to be able to provide the right tool for the right job. Even if the main part of the business is using Teams, for example, it might mean that your developers want to be able to use Slack. It might mean that other parts of the organization want to have whiteboarding tools that suit them. And while there are challenges, there's a lot of benefits and there's a lot of opportunities with a really vibrant market at the moment. So it's worth spending the time on it.
And one thing I'll add to what Matthew just said is that a lot of these vendors, they understand that there's the best tool for the job, and maybe they're not the best tool for every single job. And so they are working to make it easier to integrate tools. It used to be that IT had to do all the heavy lifting of making these tools work together. But, with APIs and other, integrations, in some cases, it's literally a one-click. Well, okay, that's not true. It's not literally one click, but it is very easy to integrate. If you want to use Slack for your team chat collaboration, but Zoom for video calls, well, there's an integration so that you can actually just start up, your users can start a Zoom call from within Slack, things like that. So it's getting easier than it used to be. So that's a bright note.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ken, Val, Matthew. I really appreciate it. And I think that there's some really valuable insights here and advice for managing multiple cloud-based collaboration tools. Thank you all so much.